Hello, everybody. My name is Portia Sabin. I am the president of the Music Business Association, and I am here to welcome you back to the Music Publishing and Royalties seminar. Day one was amazing. I'm sure you all were blown away by the amount of knowledge that was dropped. I know that the Q&A and the chat box were going crazy, and people were really enjoying all the information and trying to assimilate it. Hopefully you got a good night's sleep because there's more coming. So Music Biz and Songtrust are thrilled to be providing this forum for all of this information for you guys. One of the most popular questions we got yesterday was about recording of this event. So, obviously that makes sense. I personally had to be explained all of this stuff like 7 times before it sank in. So great idea to get the recording. We are editing the recording and we're going to prepare it and have it available for everybody on Monday. So we'll be sending that out on Monday to attendees. So, you can rewatch it in the comfort of your own home and figure everything out. Just so you guys are familiar, next week we are having a law conference on Thursday and Friday, the 24th and 25th. And that is going to be a great conference for a variety of stuff that you also need to know. It's, not just for lawyers, it's for everybody. So do check out the agenda for that, which is at musicbiz.org. And if you want to come, I think there's more knowledge to be had that's going to be really helpful. So without further ado, have a great second day. And let me turn this over to my friend Anna Bond, who is the Senior Director of Business Development at Songtrust.
Hello, thank you, Portia. As Portia said, my name is Anna Bond. I'm the Senior Director of Global Business Development at Songtrust. Thank you so much to Music Biz for having us. I'm really excited to be presenting the second day of our Music Publishing and Royalties program. We're going to start off with Alex Gershwin, who is based in LA, so it's a little earlier for him than it is for a lot of folks on this webinar. And then he's going to be digging into some higher level topics focused on businesses and representatives with Music Publishing 201. So it's a little bit of a level up from yesterday's Music Publishing 101. And after that, I'm going to be joining a panel of international experts to discuss the current global publishing picture and what the opportunities and complexities are there. A little bit of housekeeping. If you can put your questions in the Q&A channel, as they're easier for us to manage there than in the chat, that would be awesome. But yeah, thanks for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Alex now.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alex. Give me 1 second as I share my screen here. Pardon me. All right. All right, can everybody see my screen? Is it good?
You're good.
We're good. All right. So it's good to be here today. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to minimize this screen here. So as Anna just noted, this is Music Publishing 201, the current landscape of music publishing for professionals. This is part of a larger series of presentations that members of the Songtrust team have been giving throughout the week. And this one is specifically tailored to creators and businesses to ensure they're maximizing their collections within the modern music landscape. What's going on here? Okay, there. So I'm Alex Gershwin. I am the Manager of Business Development at Songtrust. And just to quickly contextualize this presentation for folks on the call. So I think it's wise to kind of look where we are in 2020 and compare that to where we were back 12 years ago in 2008, which was when I began my career in the industry. And the good news is that we're in a much better place than we were in 2008. But to circle back to 2008 for a quick second. So that was the pre-streaming era. It was pre-Spotify. And I think as the industry as a whole was dealing with the shift from being a physical-based business to being a digital-based business. And, with that came a whole new set of challenges and obstacles that needed to be overcome, and I think that being a fan of music first and consuming music as like a DPD download, like an individual digital download, wasn't quite as satisfying as what we have present day with Spotify, where you can get so many songs with the click of a mouse. And with the fragmentation, with more and more users shifting to digital, I was fortunate enough to find work at a company called RightsFlow, which was what was called a bulk mechanical licensing company. It was based in New York City. And RightsFlow's philosophy was pretty simple, but I credit the brain trust at RightsFlow with recognizing early on that there were a couple of systemic issues going on in the publishing industry, which still resonate today. The first of those issues was an issue with data and data transparency. The second issue was just a general lack of accountability. And what RightsFlow did, which was kind of groundbreaking at the time, is we would partner with recording artists, digital distributors, as well as record labels who were looking to sell or distribute music that was controlled by a third party. In the US, owned by a publisher that didn't control the rights to the publishing assets. And so what we would do is we would partner with these companies and basically clear the mechanicals with the publishers, either through HFA or do it directly with publishers that were unaffiliated with the Harry Fox agency. And so I was hired on as essentially a copyright researcher. So my job was spent researching like 200 songs a day, and it was a lot of work, but the company went on to great success. It was actually acquired by YouTube, but is now essentially what the YouTube content ID system is present day. But I left the company shortly before its acquisition. I moved out to Los Angeles, where I'm based now, to pursue the creative licensing space. I worked first with a music supervisor out in Silver Lake, who was a successful indie music soup, and then transitioned over to the pitching end of the licensing spectrum. I worked for a production music library called Music Box, which was owned by Olay, which is now called Anthem, before inevitably winding up at ASCAP. And I was at ASCAP for several years in the global services division. And my primary responsibility was basically being the in-house guy for a couple of the larger publishers in the industry, like Peer Music, Music Sales Corporation, and Big Deal Music. But in addition to helping those publishers with their inquiries, I was also taking dozens of calls every single day over a period of years. And so obviously I'm at Songtrust now. I've been here just over 2 years. I had my 2-year mark just like a week or two ago. But I think what's been beneficial about, not only about working at Songtrust, but like looking at my career path, is that I'm able to, I think, talk a little bit more personally, I guess, having been there and sort of understanding where the pain points are for a lot of folks in the industry. And when you work in the mechanical licensing, sync licensing, and then performing rights space, that's really the pillars that the music publishing business is built on. So I really enjoy working at Songtrust. There's a layer of transparency to what we do. And I hope to get you all thinking a little bit more proactively about being an active participant in your music publishing statements, which I'll address later on in this presentation. So a couple of the key questions that I want to impress upon you and get you thinking about throughout the course of the presentation include the following. First and foremost, why should I be concerned, right? Like, I think there is this feeling that like ignorance is bliss, right? It's like the old saying. And I think that applies to the music industry in a very tangible way. But I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to folks that have gotten burned because they weren't concerned, because they thought that everything was being taken care of. They may have lacked the education necessary to spot check their statements to see line items that may have not been addressed. So being concerned, being an active participant really, really matters. Secondly, what should I be looking for, right? Like, there's so much misinformation. I think that what I enjoy most, and not to talk too much about Songtrust, but what I like about what we're doing is that we see education as one of our biggest opportunities to make a difference and even the playing field for music creators and their teams around the world. So knowing what to look for is half the battle, I find, most of the times. And then thirdly, what are my priorities? Again, what we do at Songtrust is very specific. And I think I say to all of my current clients and prospective clients from the jump is, is to identify what you really need. What we do is very specific. It's basically, it's just general publishing administration, which is really specific to like royalty collection from music publishers and music creators. But we don't do sync, we don't offer advances, we don't offer creative A&R services. And so I say all of that because there are companies in the business that may already be helping you with creative services. They might be pitching your music for sync placement opportunities. They might be setting you up in A&R sessions. Maybe it's your management team that's already well-versed and very well connected, and you've already cultivated a network of people that you trust and feel like you can collaborate with, and you don't necessarily need a publisher to duplicate efforts, right? So taking a hard look at what your priorities are is going to help clarify and inform your next steps. Lastly, what can I do to address my concerns? I think it was evident to me at ASCAP that there was a lot of misinformation. People think that ASCAP and BMI do more than what they actually do. And fortunately, we live in a day and age where information is abundant. I know at Songtrust, we're really adamant about educating clients to the nth degree. So take a hard look at the industry and don't be afraid to be an active participant is what I was saying earlier. No better time than the present to talk about the current landscape. So this is all overwhelmingly positive news, mind you. I'm just gonna take a sip of water real quick. Pardon me. So in 2019, this is all from the RIAA, by the way, so you can check it out on your own time if you're so inclined. But in 2019, more than 60 million paid subscriptions drove the US music industry to its fourth consecutive year of double-digit growth. This is excellent news. This is really, really good news. I think it's almost as positive as the second bullet point here, which indicates total 2019 revenues of 11.1 billion were up 13% over 9.8 billion the previous year. Of that, and this is where we get into the nitty gritty, right? Streaming made up nearly 80% of total revenues. So the next slide is going to exemplify and give you a visualization of how prominent streaming has become. But not only is it where the eyes and ears are right now, which I think is evident to most, but it's also gaining value, right? The mechanical royalty rate will increase by 44% over the next 5 years. And so, like, why does that matter, right? Well, look at this visualization here on the left side of your screen. Use the U.S. music industry revenues of 2019 from the RIAA. Look at this is like truly amazing to me. This how overwhelming streaming is in this pie chart, 79%, right? And a case in point, right? Like, let's compare and contrast this to sync. Speaking from personal experience, right? Like, and having worked in the sync world, I love the music supervision universe, right? I think it's a beautiful field. But what I oftentimes encounter are people that are looking for creative help, right? And that's worthwhile. I totally understand that, and I support anybody that needs that base covered. But the reality is that when compared to streaming, it pales in comparison, right? Streaming doesn't really get the shine, especially in the publishing landscape. I think it does more so on the master side of the equation, and sometimes I encounter, I don't want to call them issues, but I strike up a conversation with a prospective client who might be talking to one of these new school music pitching companies that are pitching to curators at Spotify, and so I think there's certainly something to be gained for being featured on a Rap Caviar or a similar type of playlisting site, or just playlist in general, that has a really wide reach. But the value derived from streaming on the publishing side is about a third to a quarter of the value that you're going to be getting on the master end of the spectrum. So don't sleep on streaming in the publishing world. It really makes a difference. With respect to physical and digital, I was reading this article, over the course of the past couple of days. Vinyl is becoming fashionable. There's been an uptick, I think it's around 19% over the past couple of years in vinyl sales, but otherwise CDs and cassette tapes are down for pretty obvious reasons. And digital downloads, I think I made reference to this earlier, but digital downloads is dwindling pretty quickly as well. Going to the right side of the page, I'm just blown away. It makes me happy to see from 2016 to 2019 the exponential growth of what streaming revenue means to the industry. And what's interesting underneath this chart here is ad-supported on-demand video and digital customized radio services. Those are really important as well. So there's a trend, I think, around the world where people are interested in curating their own music experience. They are subscribing to playlists. They're using both on-demand and interactive streaming websites to discover new content. That's really where it's at. It's where the listeners are. So it really matters. It's growing a lot of momentum and building momentum. So this is the golden question, right? How do music publishing administrators fit into this equation? Well, I think it's important to first set the stage here and just quickly define what music publishing means. So if you were so inclined and you call up ASCAP later this afternoon and ask them to define what a publisher is, they're almost certainly going to define it as the person, entity, or entities that own or control a composition copyright. And so by definition, if you were to go home tonight, play guitar, piano, it's an original tune, no samples, nothing like that at all, then you are essentially the owner of that composition until you've relinquished those rights to a third party. And music publishing overall is basically just the business of songwriting. So I first want to go to the right side of the screen, actually, this ASCAP and BMI section here to talk about performance payments, because I think that performance in and of itself is kind of like a misunderstood term. It's a loose term, right? And you see the breakdown underneath here between live and broadcast. So, live shows is undoubtedly a revenue stream that ASCAP and BMI is going to help you collect. So if you're playing the Fonda Theater in Los Angeles or Madison Square Garden in New York, you can receive revenue for that live show either through a BMI live claim or an ASCAP on stage claim. Or conversely, if you're one of the top 200, I think, top couple of hundred grossing tourists in the previous calendar year, you might receive a giant lump sum payment in the thousands of dollars range. That's going to might be a little difficult to itemize, but that's what you want. If you're a big artist, you're going to receive some real money from your live shows from the PROs. Broadcast, though, is in my experience, it's just such a huge revenue generator, and I can say without question that people that make a lot of money from BMI and ASCAP are composing music for big cable stations as well as for network TV stations. So if you are fortunate enough to be courted by CBS or Fox or ABC to write a network primetime TV show, you should probably take that job because it's going to be very lucrative for you in probably more ways than one. But to compare that to HFA Music Reports, I just wanted to quickly identify that I think HFA Music Reports are lesser known organizations than ASCAP and BMI. In fact, I think that generally speaking, most folks that I've spoken to, even amateur songwriters, are keenly aware about ASCAP and BMI. At least they've heard of those. They've heard of the organizations before, but as it pertains to just popular consciousness, they're just not as well known. And sorry about that. And that's unfortunate because, as I was mentioning earlier, with streaming being the dominant player in the market, if you want to receive your per stream payout as a publisher, you have to have some sort of affiliation with HFA and Music Reports. And that's one of the biggest value adds that music publishing administrators would bring to the table. In addition, there's the physical and download contingent as well, which is also covered under the mechanicals header. But streaming is just so vital. I'm going to do a deeper dive into PR royalties. This is actually taken from the ASCAP public website, so you could find it on your own time if you're at all curious. But I wanted to point out a couple of line items that I think are particularly crucial here. So statement summary as owner collector, what does that mean, right? So owner, as I was saying in the previous slide, that's defined as the publisher of a given composition or a collection of compositions. If you own something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're collecting something. And a case in point is with Songtrust. So if you after this call wanted to go to ASCAP or BMI and type in some popular songs, you're almost certainly going to see some line items of like publishing designee names listed. It could be like Alex Songs or, or Music Songs or something to that effect. And then you'll see the contacting party information might say Songtrust, it might say Cobalt, Sony, Universal, Warner Chappell, the list goes on and on. What that indicates is that the publisher or the admin is collecting that revenue first. They might be handling business for that publishing entity, which might be specific to revenue collection from the PROs. It could be mechanical licensing. It could be creative, right? With Songtrust, we only do revenue collection, so it's a little bit more. It's a simpler type of collection relationship. But I wanted to point that out also because if you're looking at your catalog, you might be partially published, right? You don't necessarily have to be fully published or fully administered. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a common theme throughout your entire catalog. And then furthermore, there are situations that we encounter on occasion with clients that may have been published by a traditional publisher in years past. They may have thought that their affairs were in order and then came to realize that, publisher X or publisher Y is still collecting my revenue. It looks like the records have not been updated accordingly. And that speaks to being an active participant, right? And being concerned about how your copyrights are being administered and how your revenue is being collected. So look at who's owning your stuff, look at who's collecting your stuff through your ASCAP and BMI statements. It's gonna help you in the long run. I wanted to quickly focus as well below the owner-collector piece of the slide here, performance categories. As I made reference to a minute ago, ABC, CBS, NBC, those are your major revenue generators, right? So if you're writing custom work or you get a placement on like an NBC show, especially if it's airing in prime time, you're gonna make a lot of money. And furthermore, the reason why that's important is because the top cable stations and network TV stations are subject to census surveys, and that's really critical too. In the PRO landscape, you're going to hear about census, sample, and hybrid surveys. At least at ASCAP, you hear about hybrid surveys. And census basically means, in layman's terms, that every time that your song airs or every time that your score is being performed or airing on a TV station, you're going to get paid for it. And the payment varies. I'm going to talk about that in a second here on the right side of the screen with the credit value. It varies depending upon a variety of factors. There's actually a next slide that's going to go into further detail. So I'll address that in a moment. But if you ever have a situation where you're confronted with doing like, let's say it's like a network TV show, or maybe it's a cable show that is maybe not as interesting you find as something that's like a sort of, I don't know, a lesser viewed station or something that might be a lesser valued station, right? And you're looking, and maybe you're in a situation where you're being sold on back-end revenue, right? Just keep in mind that getting back-end revenue from a sample station is going to be harder to come by than a census station. Sample is very black and white, generally speaking. And to speak a little bit more specifically about that, not only in the context of TV, but also for radio. Radio is literally like, it's like playing roulette, right? Like if you happen to be caught in a sample of a station in question that, that's playing your material, it's like you can hit it big, you can make a lot of money. But the reality is that the vast majority of radio broadcasts and many of those sample station broadcasts on television are not going to be detected by ASCAP or maybe not by BMI. So, and even if you can prove it, because I listen to KCRW in Los Angeles. For those that are unfamiliar, it's like this very tastemakery type of radio station that plays a lot of really cool bands that like are very sync friendly. Even if you can prove to your society that like your music was aired on a specific date, it's going to be very black and white, and you're either caught in the sample or you're not. I wanted to scroll quickly down to the internet component here because this is a missing link for a lot of folks. Hybrid surveys, to break it down, and for those that may not be familiar, basically it's based on a cumulative threshold of streams. for a given track that need to be met usually each quarter in order to qualify any sort of payment at all from your PRO. So to go to the right side of the screen, there's this credit value section here. It says $8.02. That's going to fluctuate depending upon the amount of money that the PROs are taking in from the licenses that they're entering into with the TV stations and radio stations and public venues around the country. So it's going to go up or down. But to use internet as a prime example here, to use internet as a prime example here, each individual DSP has their own individual deal with the PROs. So it's like if it used to be in years past that like you would have to hit like 40,000 streams or like X thousand streams in order to get a credit value from ASCAP, and one credit being $8.02 or $8 and change or whatever it is present day. So just be mindful that that you're not getting a per stream payout. It's a threshold stream payout. And it's very hard to audit that if you're a member of ASCAP and you don't have that layer of transparency. Last thing on this slide is for domestic and international payments. So to pay attention to this for a hot second. So domestic payouts, obviously that's US-based performance revenue. If you see that international payments are part of your revenue breakdown, right? And maybe you're wondering how those are calculated and how those are paid out. I'm going to talk about that later on. It may be worth your while to do some investigation, right? To be that active participant, to continue to think about your revenue sources, because international payments are crucial and it's very much a global business. So just to sort of recap a little bit and to continue on for the PRO part of my presentation here. So again, royalties are derived from performance licenses with music users like TV, radio stations, streaming services, concert halls, and public venues. The credit value is applied to writer and publisher's performance credits. So like that's going to fluctuate. But not only the fluctuation, this last piece here is so critical. With the dollar amount of the license and amount of music use, frequency of use, all playing major roles in your payout. So to use, again, an example of television, NBC or CBS show, your payout is going to be different if it's primetime CBS versus late night versus morning versus afternoon. And what I used to do occasionally at ASCAP is like, some people would call me up and they'd be like, hey, can I get the royalty payout or royalty breakdown for like background instrumental cue on CBS? Can you also give it to me for MTV? Can you give it to me for MTV2, right? I think MTV versus MTV2 is a good example because MTV was subject to a census versus MTV2, which is subject to a sample, right? Be an active participant, call your PRO if anything is lacking clarity, because they may be able to give you some information that'll help you that'll make you, I guess, think about things productively and get you to think about the most informed, best steps to be taken. So now the other part, right? Like mechanicals. How should I be thinking about publishing mechanicals in 2020? Well, I think that this is probably the best example that I could point to about what streaming mechanicals mean and how it applies to a songwriter's bottom line or a music creator's bottom line in 2020. I think probably many on this call are familiar with CD Baby, TuneCore, and DistroKid. These are digital distribution companies. They get your music available on all these DSP platforms everywhere in the world. But oftentimes what I hear, right, is like the producer or the music creator who is using the standard CD Baby package or standard TuneCore package, instead of paying the premium for CD Baby Pro or like TuneCore's version of like CD Baby Pro, TuneCore Pro. And the problem there, right, is that again, for streaming mechanicals, there are two sides. There's the master recording side, which is what your distributor is going to collect by default. But that publishing share, right, is going to be unaccounted for. In other words, you need to pay for CD Baby Pro in order to pocket your mechanical revenue, meaning like the composition copyright revenue. Otherwise, you're almost certainly going to be leaving money on the table because CD Baby, it goes back to the systemic issue at rights flow, right? Like if the distributor doesn't know who the publishers are, then the DSPs are not going to know who the publishers are, right? And then it becomes this issue of accountability, like who gets what, who gets compensated, where does that money even go, right? And it becomes a matching issue and a data issue. So looking at the market, and if you're in a situation where you're maybe looking at distributors to work your next record, always questioning what the money, just following the money, where the breakdown is going to be and what you can do to get that extra dough, right, is going to pay major dividends to you in more ways than one, excuse me. I wanted to include this slide because I think it's a good visualization to better clarify the platforms that are paying both performance and mechanical revenue, right? It's not only so in other words, there's Spotify revenue that's going to be paid to your PRO that you'll see itemized on ASCAP and BMI. There's also Spotify revenue that you're going to see from your distributor. There's also Spotify revenue that you'd see from a publishing administrator like Songtrust or Cobalt or Warner Chappell, right? It's coming from the same source, from Spotify or for Apple Music or Tidal, right? But it's paid out differently and it's attributed to different rights. So make sure you're covered all in all, right? All over the place. As for the bullet points here, with music-centric and AV-centric streaming platforms are both factored into PRO payouts, this is where it gets a little confusing as well, right? It's like Netflix, Prime, and Hulu, they're also subject to that threshold model that I mentioned earlier with the PROs detecting and paying out revenue from Spotify and Tidal and Apple Music, right? You're not going to see that from HFA and music reports. But to be mindful of how your music is being used and the media and whether there's a visual component versus just music component might also help better inform your decisions. Again, due to the consent decrees, ASCAP and BMI are restricted from licensing collecting mechanicals. So critical, right? It's multiple different organizations. They collect on different ends of the spectrum. And so just being mindful is so key. But it doesn't even clarify, I should say, it only helps to inform what's happening on the local level, right? So what about international royalties? You probably have seen foreign statements from your PRO, but what does that mean that you're covered? What does that mean exactly? So a global perspective really quickly here. What happens in the PRO landscape is when you join ASCAP or BMI, they are going to be your PRO by default. They issue an IPI number, which is like a unique identifier that flags your compositions and basically make sure that you're payable globally, right? But the issue is that ASCAP and BMI are entering into licenses, performance licenses, with local establishments, right? So that could be a bar or restaurant, that could be a radio station or a TV station, or maybe a streaming service that has a footprint within the U.S., right? But the problem is that they don't directly license, they don't enter into performance licenses, I should say, directly for establishments like Joe's Pub in London or a bistro in Paris or a venue in Rio de Janeiro, right? What happens instead is something that's far more complicated. And so if you were curious to know more, there's stuff on the PRO websites, but international revenue is subject to reciprocal agreements. And the way that works is basically that all these sister societies, like our neighbors to the north, it's SOCAN versus ASCAP or BMI, right? Which is on the local level. So I use SOCAN because I think so many clients that I encounter have their top 5 biggest markets will be New York, Los Angeles, Toronto, Canada, Nashville, Atlanta, right? To get your money from Toronto is a different process than collecting your money from all those regional US cities, right? So the only way, in other words, that you're going to receive your money from Toronto is if SOCAN is doing their job and basically policing the performance activity for your songs in Toronto and in Montreal and in Vancouver, right? And the problem there is twofold. Firstly, it takes you anywhere from 1 to 3 years to receive that revenue. Every single PRO is on a different payment schedule, right? So you're not going to receive them as regularly, and you're going to have virtually zero transparency into what's happening in Canada or what's happening in Mexico or in England or in France or Italy. The list goes on and on. So that's a problem, right? And oftentimes what happens is you'll see yourself, you'll see some international revenue come in, you'll see the survey periods in question, and you'll just take it for face value. You'll be like, well, I guess I'm covered. I see my Canadian money, or I see my French money, or my German money, right? But in reality, it's like, are you really covered, right? And what I can tell you, this is personal experience. When I was at ASCAP, and many of you are probably familiar with ASCAP on Stage or BMI Live, the way that it works, right, is you have to submit an inquiry through your ASCAP Member Access or like BMI's Member Access to log a local show at the Fonda Theater in Los Angeles or at Staples Center or wherever you perform, right, to like see that you're going to get a few extra dollars for the live show. The same thing holds true at like, you know, for like German writers that are affiliates of GEMA, right? So like, to make it a little bit more complex, add an extra layer here. In order to get, so if you're a live touring musician, in order to get money from your show in Berlin, you need to submit an international claim with ASCAP or BMI, and then they have a staff of you know, a handful of people at ASCAP that go and submit the inquiry with GEMA or PRS in England to basically say, hey, GEMA, there was a show that occurred on this date, this time, this artist. We'd like to collect that money. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what it says. And then GEMA has to account for it. And the way they do that is by registering the song, the title registration, in GEMA's system. And that triggers a payment back to ASCAP or BMI, and then hopefully you get your money, all right? Well, I'm here to tell you that there are flaws in that system. It takes forever to get that money. People that submit these international inquiries get no transparency, right? The people that work at the PROs are only as good as the information that they receive, which is periodically like a couple of times throughout a year. So it's like, what the hell is going on? What's the status of my inquiry, right? At ASCAP, what I used to do, this is fairly technical, but just stay with me. We used to log local setlist submission claims. We basically used to create the registration in ASCAP so that the GEMA writer would get their money for the live show, right? And that's kind of like the tip of the iceberg, because it gets far more significant if you have major revenue generators like AV as an example. Like I'm just a couple of weeks ago, I onboarded a client with Songtrust that is a filmmaker who's also a film score publisher. And he's working on he's finished a project that has a real budget of like $20 to $25 million being distributed everywhere by Universal, right? And lo and behold, this is largely anecdotal evidence here, but I had to talk with another business development executive about this, about 60% of revenue for the type of theatrical release that we were talking about here is going to originate from outside the US. And unlike the United States, where there isn't a performance royalty payout that happens for theatrical performances, meaning like in movie theaters themselves, places like France, they care about that, which is great because that means that you can get money from box office receipts. You're not going to get that in the United States. So for him, it's like he needs a publishing administrator to be aggressive and make sure that that money is being collected at source, at origin, that there's someone that's going to be breaking down those doors to make that happen for you, as opposed to relying exclusively on your society and hoping for the best that those reciprocal agreements are going to work in your favor, right? So this slide kind of summarizes what I'm talking about. And forget Songtrust, right? Like any publisher, any publishing administrator with global reach is going to have these direct relationships everywhere in the world. So, case in point with Songtrust, I'm going to show you another slide that will outline how massive we are. We're the largest publishing admin by volume in the world at this point. But the idea is that if you're using a publishing admin, whether it's Cobalt, Songtrust, Universal, whoever, right, they're going to have affiliates. They're going to have troops on the ground in APRA in Australia, or Akum in Israel, or GEMA in Germany, or Abramus in Brazil. And so the idea is you're going to have a lifeline. You're going to have, it's like almost like a flight map with American Airlines, right? Like if you're using a local, a little regional aircraft that doesn't have, it's not able to get to Australia, you need to get to Australia, you need to use somebody who's capable of getting you there. That's the idea with pub admin. And this is kind of more in line with what I'm talking about. This is not even an exhaustive list. This is like a rough list. Since the beginning of Q3, we've actually added new direct relationships in Croatia and in, I'm blanking on the other one. It was Croatia and Latvia. That was the other one, right? And the idea, right, is that I'm willing to bet that virtually everybody on this call is not going to make a killing from Latvia or Croatia, but that isn't the point. The idea is that if it's a micro penny, that it's your micro penny. And better it be in your pocket than just waiting in limbo and unaccounted for, until somebody matches it and pays you out, right? So something that we're really adamant about at Songtrust is growing our footprint. Right now we are capable of monetizing and collecting from 216 territories around the world. I think it's 52 pay sources now. That continues to grow quarter over quarter and really addresses the global component of what you should be looking at. But it doesn't stop there, right? Like this is the evolving consumption trend situation that we're confronted with today. And it's unbelievable for someone like me who is like a lifer, for the past 10 plus years in the music industry to see digital disruptors such as Tik, Twitch, and Triller completely just like change the game on a dime, right? So current trends, like kind of unbelievable. TikTok has roughly 800 million active users, but only 30 million of those users are in the United States. So what I think is cool about that is like, it's been shown that the vast majority of their users are not in the United States. Many of them are Asia. It's a Chinese-based company. And while it's been difficult to break down those barriers and monetize that region traditionally, the fact that we're in the infancy stages is a major, it should boost the publishing economy, and it's a good thing. It's a good first hurdle for us collectively. Not only is there like just a huge active user base, but 66% of TikTok users are under 30, right? That's like target demographic for labels and publishers, for music consumption. Like they're always on their phones. It's a lot of repeat listeners, which is huge. Triller, which is like the newer of the newest frontier, I feel like, recently reached #1. It's like the new sheriff in town, right? 250 million downloads and over 100 million monthly listeners and monthly like engagement users, whatever you want to call it, are using Triller. Kind of crazy. What's your CPP? Understanding stage versus followers, right? I think this is an interesting concept. I can't talk too much about it because, quite honestly, I'm not an expert in how to mastermind and break an artist on TikTok or Triller. It's ultimately not Songtrust's role. But stage, meaning like, there are multiple contributing factors that will impact your stage, meaning like your playlist activity, who's listening to it. It's kind of just like your profile in a sense, but active followers means fan engagement. Those are people that you can take with you, that probably will come to your shows, right? Which will add to a ripple effect with your publishing revenue, right? So you should take both things into account as you're using those platforms and thinking about them more critically as it pertains to your artists or your catalog's performance domestically and overseas. Lastly, this is actually like the oldest of all of these bullet points, but that over 40,000 tracks are added to Spotify every single day, right? So this next slide here is gonna talk about the ripple effect, right? Like, what does that mean, right? And so here's a case in point. Conquera is a Songtrust client as of several months ago. None of these guys are Conquera, by the way. He's on the next slide. But in any event, Conquera is a really interesting case study because he had been around for like a couple of years, but he had virtually like 0 followers. I'm probably speaking a little bit harshly. He had not that many followers, not that many streams. All of a sudden, in Q1 of this year, this banana song with Shaggy goes viral on TikTok. Things go crazy, right? To the tune of now over 95 million streams for this track, right? This is literally a Spotify profile page. You can see it on your own if you're so inclined. So, and this is Conqueror, by the way. So these numbers are astronomical, right? Like this is the goal, is that for you to have this many streams in that amount of time, like within less than a year, maybe half a year or so. From my standpoint, again, and also through some research, right? Like there aren't that many true success stories with people that have blown up and become household names as a result of going viral on TikTok. You know, you're talking about Lil Nas X is like kind of like numero uno, but after that, it's a little bit difficult to think about other people that have become hugely successful and sign major label deals. But using Conqueror, right, like his management team, who I love, are trying to figure out and plot different stages in his career as a result of the spike on TikTok. But what I care about is not only the monthly listeners, which speaks to the engagement and people that are just like discovering his content on TikTok and then discovering it elsewhere. But also because TikTok are like these 15-second or 30-second videos, 15-second videos, I think now, people want to sometimes consume the full song. So then they go to the other platforms to do that. And what better platform than Spotify, where you can consume music at the click of a mouse, and to speak to only 30 million listeners or like users within the United States. Look at where people are discovering his content. Look at his listener profile. You got Amsterdam, you got Paris, right? You've got, I mean, it's a global business. So that should beg the question, what are your revenue sources and where are the people that are listening to your content located? And it's not just Conqueror. You know, a few months ago, I had worked with a very prominent law firm in Los Angeles whose producer had cuts with Halsey and Miley Cyrus and Triple X, among other performers. And lo and behold, Halsey's second biggest market at that week, at least, was Jakarta, Indonesia, which was, you know, like who would have thought? Lo and behold, Songtrust actually has a direct affiliation with WAMI, which is incredible. So, and that's the CMO, if you will, in Indonesia. So it's like having your tentacles spread everywhere is going to be hugely beneficial. Music publishing, the waiting game. Give me 1 second here. So the waiting game with music publishing is something that you have to take in stride, I think. And this slide will talk a little bit more about that. Sorry, give me 1 second. So in any event, music publishing, the waiting game. There is no such thing as instant gratification in the publishing business. It doesn't exist. The only instant gratification is if you sign a deal that has a big advance or if you get a sync off the bat. If neither of those are true, you're gonna have to wait. And the reason for that is it's multi-layered, okay? Because with Songtrust, like we have a pretty transparent dashboard that shows you like the timeline of when your registrations are submitted. It's a work in progress. It's nice to at least have some layer of transparency. But the first order of business is to submit songs for registration with your collection society, right? That takes time. People that have been through the member access portal understand how arduous a process that can be. And it's not exactly all that much fun. But after that's submitted, or as a case in point with Songtrust, we use a standard industry format called CWR, which is recognized around the world. Songs are registered with society and the tracking starts, right? That in and of itself takes time, because with Songtrust, it's like, it's coming from one place, it's going everywhere. It's going to 52 pay sources, right? And so after a number of months, by the way, it takes about 6 months for songs to be registered, to be actually recognized, acknowledged is the word that's used with these CWR files. So that takes a long time. The first royalty checks start arriving 9 to 12 months after songs have been registered with the societies, which shouldn't come as much of a surprise, because even if you call up ASCAP today, they're going to say it's 2 to 3 quarters after the performance activity is detected, and that's when you start to receive a payment. So manage your expectations. We say 9 to 12 months to help manage those expectations. International, though, takes a little bit longer, starts arriving in 12 to 18 months. And then retroactive is even after that, later in the game, right? Just FYI, what we commonly quote to prospective clients is like 2 to 3 years in retroactive accounting. It varies. It varies depending upon the accuracy of the data. It varies depending upon how effective the collection organization is. Some are, quite honestly, better than others and have better infrastructures. It also depends on the type of royalty. Performance rights organizations like ASCAP and BMI are typically not as forgiving as mechanical collection organizations are, but we don't know it's available until we make a claim to it and register the content. So food for thought, but certainly worth thinking about. Why does it take so damn long, right? Well, there's so many societies identifying and collecting inconsistent data, registering the works. It just takes time, right? So if you're in it for the long haul and you can play the waiting game and not sell off your rights immediately and would rather publish that music over a long-term, long-term time frame, you might be in a better position, because now I think that artists are becoming more informed that having real equity in their songs is where the money's at. And that's becoming sexy where it wasn't in years past. Metadata is your friend. Make it as transparent as you can. I can't tell you how important it is to get your ish together, right? Like have the ISRCs ready, have the splits ready. I could say as a case in point, the biggest mistake that I used to see at ASCAP and BMI is like people that would register songs and just be like, oh, 10%, 90% unclaimed, unaccounted for. That is going to hurt you. And the reason for that is because ASCAP and BMI have to fit the puzzle pieces together. And if there are like 12 writers on a hip hop song, which I would see on occasion, they're not going to know how your percentage split fits into the full share picture if like literally they have something that's been like validated, for lack of a better word, by Universal or Cobalt that says that like you actually aren't getting that 1.67%, this person is. So make sure that you have your splits in order when you register songs, and ISRCs are super crucial as well. Songtrust is integrated with the Spotify API, so grabbing this ISRC is like huge, because mechanical collection organizations like HFA need to license this code in order to get you paid. It's a whole thing, but it's part of the process. More data is going to work in your favor. Have it all available. Know what you're getting, know your splits, know your entitlement. It's going to help you in the long run. I know that I talked a lot. I know that there's a lot of information that I peppered you all with. So here are some key takeaways. Understand your revenue sources. Like above all else, where is your money coming from? Where are your audience is? How are you getting paid? Where are you getting paid? Like those are so important. And if you're only covering one of those bases, you're not going to be accounted for in other areas of your revenue collection. ASCAP and BMI are only one piece of the puzzle. Especially in the digital age, right? Like ASCAP and BMI are going to help you with things like network television, cable television, might help you with live performances. It's not going to help you that much in the digital world. And I could see it from like my own clients that have gotten like less than $100 for having tens of millions of streams, because those streams are occurring in places like Singapore and Thailand, okay? Like it's a global business, make sure you're covered. Define your role. What are you? Are you a music creator? Are you a publisher? And furthermore, what are your needs? Like what are your top priorities? Again, Songtrust is so specific. We operate within a very specific niche business within the publishing industry. So if you're looking for creative, Songtrust is not for you. If you're looking for an advance, Songtrust is not for you, right? But if you have companies that are already following through on that part of your part of your business, right? Maybe it's your label, maybe it's your distributor that's providing creative, maybe it's your management team, then you don't need someone to duplicate efforts for you. You know, having equity in your songs is where the sex appeal is now. And publishing admin is not particularly sexy objectively, but it's getting there. What can you do on your own? Do you even need a publishing administrator, right? Like the big thing now is like if you've identified that all of your revenue is performance activity, it stems from performance activity, and it's all domestic, then, and you've got like 0 international profiles, 0 international listeners, 0 international consumers, you probably don't need a publishing administrator. You need a publishing administrator if you have a global audience, if your music is distributed everywhere, if you're having trouble clarifying whether or not you're actually getting your German or Brazilian money or your Australian money. That's the value add with publishers, right? So just take that into account. It's hard to clarify, but it's going to help you make those informed decisions. Last and not least, I've said it before, I've said it again, I've said it multiple times during this presentation, be an active participant and ask questions. Just don't be afraid to show that you can ask questions and be vulnerable. It is, people are learning, I'm learning. I've learned a lot, I've been humbled, I've been, I've had to ask questions of people internally that have specific types of expertise in like international collection versus mechanical collection versus digital versus performance. Like I've been there, I've been through the ringer, but it's worth it, especially if you are a publisher, you own your own content. Be an active participant, ask questions, and get informed and absorb as much as you can. And we're here to help, right? We don't discriminate based on your streaming activity, what's hot. We're not clout chasers, right? So if you're curious, you can check out any of our webinars, any of our materials on our website. We're here to help. And that's it. And that's my song and dance routine. I'm Alex Gershwin. I'm the manager of business development at Songtrust. And it was a pleasure. So thank you. I guess that's it for me.
Hello, Alex. That was a phenomenal presentation. The chat, people are loving it. Thank you for that deeper dive into some of these important concepts. We didn't get to the Q&A. I did answer a few questions in the channel.
I got excited, I guess. I'm sorry.
I know, no, I mean, there's a lot of information to share. If we can answer any of these at the end of the current panel, we will. If we can't, we'll do our best to get back to you guys. But thanks to everyone. Thank you, Alex. That was awesome.
Cool.
Guys, I'm really excited about the panel that we have coming up. These panelists are from all over the world, and they have expertise in all of the most exciting and most dynamic music markets currently. And I'm so honored that they're all here. And so let's dive in. This is going to be a look at the global market as it is right now, and specifically talking about Latin America, Asian markets, and different countries in Africa, and how those are being handled. So looks like people are jumping on. I see Dwayne Ector, who is Songtrust Global Head of Partner Relations and Income Tracking. He usually, although not in the last 6 months, is bopping around the globe, meeting with our partners, meeting with new partners. But he's been landlocked in London. Thank you for the after hours joining us, Dwayne.
No problem.
Josh Norick from Songtrust partner Regalias Digitales, who is joining us and will be talking a bit about Latin America, which is his area of expertise. He has many areas of expertise. Josh and I have known each other for a very long time. And we've got a couple of, let's see, oh, everyone's not on my screen. We have Ryan Holmes from PRS. Thank you. I realized I couldn't see everyone's faces because there are so many of you. Who will be talking about current issues and markets that are evolving in Asia for us, and David Alexander from Sheer Music Publishing. He is the founder of that organization, which is acting to bring publishing and opportunities to songwriters throughout Africa. And Sheer Music Publishing is a sister company to Songtrust within the Downtown Music family. I'm so excited to have you all here. I am going to start off with our first question, which I'm going to address to Ryan first, but this is really a question for Ryan, David, and Josh about their perspective. What? No, that's anyways, about the different territories that they manage. Respective, what am I doing? So Ryan, so the background is when I'm talking to prospects and clients, which is what I do, about the global music market, Pan-Asia, Latin America, and Africa are the three regions I am most often asked about. Obviously, those are all huge regions with many countries, many genres, many different types of organizations. But people see tremendous opportunities, not only for artists from these regions in the current top music markets, like the US and Europe and Japan, as well as opportunities for artists from the US and other Anglophone countries to expand their reach into these regions. So, people are seeing both artists from these different global markets coming into the US. People are much more excited about, non-English songs and compositions now, which is awesome. And more global genres, as well as, what are the opportunities for US and UK and European artists when it comes to those developing markets. So Ryan, I'm going to ask you first, what do you see is the biggest opportunity for artists from, Pan-Asia specifically, when it comes to expanding into the current, top global markets, which is the US and European countries and Japan, those more established music markets? And what factors do you think are kind of pushing these crossover opportunities, which really seem to be kind of newer and developing?
Cool. Well, firstly, thanks for the invite, and it's a pleasure to be here. That's a really, really good question, and I can share some comments from a CMO perspective and as an industry observer. So when we talk about the larger markets, I guess it's helpful to remember that at least 4 of IFP's top 10 are on the Pacific Ocean. So Japan, South Korea, Australia, and China. So, and when you talk about opportunities, really digital is the first thing that comes to mind. And it's where CMOs are seeing growth, and not just in those larger music markets I've mentioned. There's lots of interesting developments locally in the region. Universal's partnership with Tencent, for instance, to establish a JV label to help cultivate and nurture local talent. And you could probably expect some export opportunities there. There's also the Def Jam extending its footprint into Southeast Asia. So whatever innovative marketing strategies and partnerships that artists and everyone uses, it seems that table stakes, it has to involve digital at some level. And it's really interesting to see the recent interest around short form video and services that provide those sort of opportunities for artists and creators. And in particular, how, something can be picked up and go viral, and then how that interacts with the services that we're more accustomed to seeing. So I guess and this speaks to the Anglophone market more so at the moment, but I think there are a couple of good recent examples from New Zealand. So you might be familiar with the song Super Lonely, which feels like it was an anthem for the COVID lockdown period. The artist called Benny, who had a bit of a presence in her home territory, so New Zealand, Australia. But then that was picked up and went viral, and then that translated to something like over 100 million streams on Spotify. I think she ended up playing the Ellen DeGeneres show, but don't ask me how I know that, but that's another interesting point. But also a smaller, lesser known 17-year-old producer who created a backing track that was viral, and then that was picked up by Jason Derulo and became Savage Love. So, that went to #1 in the UK, the Billboard Top 100. It was a big hit all around the world. So, it's clear that digital provides a channel for those and an opportunity for those to blow up, and those may be outliers. But when we look at the more established sort of artists from Asia, at least, and this dovetails into COVID, BTS and the successes of their recent live streaming performance, 750,000 tickets across the globe, $20 million in revenue from ticket sales alone. So it's clear that there's massive opportunities out there utilizing digital to extend that reach. But the one part where I go back and put my CMO hat on, and this is kind of the crux of all this, is that I'd emphasize that the realization of any of those long-term opportunities, it really does need suitable rights management infrastructure underneath all that to support and sustain that. So the creators and the artists are able to, continue to derive an income as those processes, as their music continues to be used. And so that's underpinning the licensing, the matching, the processing, the cooperation between partners. And I guess that's where we all come in to some extent. So that's quite a lot there to unpack, but that's kind of how I see it at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that your point about the producer, I mean, we've got beat leasing sites, we've got, the short form video platforms of the world, as well as the long form videos, and the concept of virality that really seems to be happening on a global scale does really open up those opportunities. And so Ryan, the similar question in terms of, is it the same factors you see are influencing the Asia Pacific region opening up to non-native artists? Is it those same factors? Is it the video? Is it the, kind of digital? Is it playlisting? Or is it, case by case basis?
Yeah, so yes to all of those things. And I know that's not really that helpful, but I mean, it's no secret that there's strong international repertoire export with Anglophone, beg your pardon, countries. It travels well and reaches pretty much every corner of the globe. But what isn't often appreciated is just how that works within Asia Pacific. And in fact, there's strong representation of Korean repertoire or Korean originating repertoire, and similarly Japanese repertoire in those regions. And those are much more broadly consumed. And that's beyond digital, and that's something that there's a long history of social and cultural kind of exchange in those territories. And I feel like at the moment it still follows that path, but digital really just speeds that up and facilitates that.
Sure. No, that totally makes sense. As a huge go-between fan, I'm a go-betweens fan. I definitely recognize it, especially with the Australia and New Zealand. There have long been those opportunities. But luckily, it's opening up, especially outside of the Anglophone repertoire. Well, I'm going to ask a similar question to David. David, what do you think is the biggest opportunity for artists from the countries of Africa when it comes to expanding their reach into the, kind of established top global markets, which do, as Ryan mentioned, include multiple Asia Pacific markets, but also, the US, Europe, as well as like Japan, Australia.
But too. And
but more languages as well, generally.
Like Ryan, thanks for the invitation. Pleased to be here. I think that definitely collaborations has been the way that African artists have kind of broken across into global markets. Probably the biggest song that we were involved with in recent times was Chop My Money with P Square from Nigeria and collaborating with Akon. Unfortunately, due to the kind of lack of education around song rights, there was a 350% overclaim in terms of publishing on that song. And so a lot of people didn't get paid. And that's kind of unfortunate. I think there have been a lot of lessons that have been learned since then. Certainly you spoke about the intervention of some of the bigger players in the continent. We've seen Universal opening Def Jam. We've seen Warner doing a deal with Chocolate City or with Africori and the Downtown Group with ourselves in Sheer. And recently from our own country, the Jerusalem dance kind of hit a couple of 100 million and blew up on TikTok and was the most Shazam song for a while. But definitely collaborations has been the way to break across that cultural barrier. So often it kind of breaks between the local language and the Anglophone market, or it also provides an entry point into a market where there is already an existing audience for the collaboration partner. So I think that that's been the biggest opportunity and will continue to be the opportunity, and hopefully you'll be hearing a lot more music coming out of Africa.
Absolutely. And that's very interesting. And what you're saying, I think, speaks to what Ryan said. We can put the music out there and, encourage the collaborations and make sure that everybody is participating, but you also have to make sure they're able to participate on the back end. And like you're saying, it is always a learning process. So the same question for you, the kind of opposite scenario. Do you see that the major music markets across Africa are opening up for, artists from the US, from Europe, from the UK, even from like Australia, New Zealand, in a way that they haven't in the past? And if so, is it collaborations, or is it virality or playlists or other factors that you think are most influencing that kind of, import as well as the export?
So I grew up in South Africa, and certainly here, international Anglophone pop music was certainly probably on a par or maybe even more highly consumed than local music. That has kind of changed over time, particularly since independence in 1994. But when I travel on the continent, my experience is that actually their local music is the highest consumed, and then the surrounding countries. English pop music, and particularly hip hop, is definitely a factor. It's prevalent everywhere. It's causing a cultural shift, but it also creates an area that one can collaborate across. Like hip hop encourages the collaborative spirit. Mm-hmm. So there's always been a market. I think for the international, the idea has been, how do we get our money out? Right. And I know you're probably going to come to kind of collectives and licensing hubs. So I'm going to leave that for now. But for a long time, the problem has been that the local collective management organizations have been, to some extent, really not effective either in collecting or in distributing the money. And therefore, it didn't matter how successful you were on the continent. Certainly, there were no physical sales. And even now that there is digital, how do you extract the money out? So that's going to be an important part of the conversation.
Yeah, and that's going to demotivate investment into artists and careers and songwriters if there's, nothing on the back end. We will definitely talk about collection complexity across Africa in a bit. But Josh, I'm going to turn to you. What do you think is the biggest opportunity for artists from across Latin America when it comes to expanding in other markets, and what factors do you think are pushing those crossover opportunities?
Sure. Well, I primarily rep either Latin artists from across the Americas, or conversely, we also rep a number of US non-Latin artists for international collection. I'd say for us, Brazil has been a very interesting territory. It's one of only 3 countries that YouTube currently pays direct publishing royalties for. Within YouTube, I believe they call it reproduction royalties as far as Brazil is concerned.
Lots of different things.
Yeah, I know. In the US, it's called synchronization royalties. In Brazil and Canada, they call it reproduction. And unfortunately, those are the only 3 countries in the world where YouTube is paying directly to publishers. So for us, Brazil has been very interesting, especially for artists that have toured there and are big there. I mean, probably my most interesting case in Brazil is actually a non-Latin artist called Soja, a very popular reggae group. And if you look at their Spotify analytics, you'll see like Brazil is their #1 market. They're massive there. I mean, it's always a curious thing for me. It's like a white boy reggae group, and for some reason they're huge in Brazil. But they've had very strong YouTube publishing earnings. And then another similar case, Daddy Yankee, who we represent, massive reggaeton artist. He might be American, but only 14% of his YouTube views come from the United States. He's a truly global artist, massive in Europe, massive in Latin America, Japan. But I think Brazil has been great on both the YouTube side. And then also, I know we're talking on a publishing panel, but just briefly, neighboring rights. Brazil seems to be much more transparent than the rest of Latin America. So I hate to be cynical about many other countries in Latin America, but there seems to be a good amount of corruption or just minimal streaming rates in these other countries. But Brazil has been a real positive for us. I think touring there has been the biggest thing, or just being a truly viral global artist like Daddy Yankee. Right. You're going to see significant numbers out of Brazil. And people always forget, like, they speak Portuguese there. So you can't, as a Spanish language artist, think I'm going to be big in Brazil. It has to just be global music. They clearly listen to music in English and Spanish in Brazil. So that has been, I think, a big factor.
So you think touring is a big piece of having success in that market? I've seen that on the master side in my past life.
Yeah, at least
in Mexico specifically.
Yes, at least pre-COVID, I would say for many even non-Latin artists. I mean, the New York Times even had a great article about it last year, where Britpop groups from England were seeing that Mexico was their #1 market. And Mexico City has 25 million people. It's probably the #1 market for jazz artists and pop artists and rock artists. It doesn't even matter what language. So Mexico is huge. Unfortunately, YouTube, they're not paying publishing directly, but certainly other things, performance royalties come out of Mexico. I think Brazil and Mexico are the real bright spots as far as Latin America is concerned.
So the second question is kind of that converse question, is, kind of tied into the next question I was going to point to you, Josh, which is, Latin America continues to be the most rapidly growing market for music consumption. I think it's, 5 years in a row, it has been, the #1 growth region. And obviously that means there are opportunities for artists from other countries going into Latin America, as well as the prodigious amount of music that is coming out of that region and is being consumed domestically.
Yes.
What do you think is driving the growth in the region, kind of from your perspective, and what do you think is going to keep happening?
Yeah, I mean, the growth is pretty simple. You have to think back to the CD era in Latin America. Back then, piratas, or pirated copies, were outnumbering legitimate sales by a 10-to-1 volume ratio. So like for every 10 pirated CDs in Mexico or in Argentina, you were looking at 1 legal copy. But with streaming, it's all legitimate now. There's no more piracy. So on one hand, that's amazing, right? Even in the poorest countries, even in like a rural part of El Salvador, someone has access to Spotify on their phone. And that's just adding so many more consumers. I mean, it's really a volume business, because the rates, a lot of people are using the free tier on Spotify in South America. So it doesn't generate all that much revenue. But from a numbers perspective, you are bringing hundreds of millions of new customers that were never previously paying a penny for music during the CD era or the MP3 era, because even during the iTunes peak, very few people in Latin America felt comfortable using credit cards online or even had credit cards. So I think that just from a streaming standpoint, that's just changed everything in Latin America. And then playlisting also. I mean, in the United States, everyone looks at New Music Friday, for example, on Spotify, but the equivalent playlist, Novedades Mexico, has even more subscribers than New Music Friday in the United States. So getting an Anglo act, for example, on New Music Friday can generate huge numbers. They don't think the same way we do in the United States, where we segregate everything. You'll almost never see a Latin song on Spotify New Music Friday. In Mexico, they'll put a British rock band next to an American rapper, next to a banda or norteño artist. And so I think that's real opportunities for artists. And obviously that comes more from the distribution side.
Right.
And I think for artists, a piece of advice I'd have is not to just think of your own country. Ask your distributor to pitch you in other markets if you know you have followers there.
Yeah, that's a really key piece. And like you said, also with touring, once that's available again, is, even if you can just dip down to Mexico City, it's like, that makes a huge difference in terms of your impact in that region, for sure.
Absolutely.
So it's like, there's a lot of potential music consumers and increasing access, as well as kind of, the increasing globalization that digital is providing.
Very much so.
So Dwayne, speaking of Latin America, what are the, from your perspective, what are the challenges of collection across the region and the opportunities kind of to improve things?
So in Latin America, the CMOs they're in control. They're very much a tight-knit group amongst themselves, and very self-interested. And they, to varying degrees, do a decent job. I totally agree with Josh in that Brazil and Mexico, there's a lot of volume, and I must say the local societies there, I do believe that they actually do a pretty decent job at trying to collect. But the lower down the chain you go, in terms of country size, the societies, they face a lot of different challenges themselves. So you have Argentina, for instance, where the dollar is being devalued on an almost daily basis. You have Chile, where the broadcasters are, they've managed to go to court and had convinced the court to not have them pay the local society SCD for a while. And then you have efficiency problems at certain societies, and you have political problems and corruption problems at others. So there's a whole host of things going on across Latin America that that poses challenges to the local societies. And I think that pre-COVID, a lot of them had issues with collections for stuff like shops and bars and clubs. I've heard a story where in Mexico, an agent had walked up to a shop in some rural city to try to get a music license. The agent was from the local society, and the shop owner took a gun and put it on the table and said, "Do you want to talk? Let's talk." So there's a whole host of different. It's a different environment there, depending on where you go, because it's not the same everywhere. But where opportunities are concerned, I think that there are a lot as well. Being that I think that there's a lot of opportunities for societies to help one another in terms of advice and trying to figure out what works in one territory and have it apply in another one, for instance. They do that as well. I think there's opportunities for technology to play a part in local collections from societies, now that things seem to be moving online a lot quicker all around the world due to COVID. I think that there definitely are opportunities there for societies to be a lot more innovative in the ways that they collect royalties in order for them to survive, because they really don't have a choice. And in terms of digital collections, as everyone on the panel has been saying so far, Latin America is no different in terms of the growth of digital. Spotify is now launched pretty much almost everywhere in the world. There's the free tier. YouTube is another one that, YouTube, for the value gap that it creates, it still creates some value for rights holders to monetize their works all around the world. And I know that in a lot of the Latin American territories, YouTube is one of the main forms or the main ways that they consume music. And there's other things, but those to me are the main challenges and opportunities at the moment.
Do you think that technology also opens up opportunities for that kind of collaborative work among the local societies in different Latin American countries to kind of better
potentially
each other?
Yes, potentially, yes. From a society perspective, you have 20 odd societies potentially using different databases, dealing with a lot of the same, especially big clients like your big music publishers and so on and so forth. And there could potentially be room for them to optimize on the back end, right? Have one shared database instead of a whole bunch of different ones. Processing as well, doing the same thing, having one centralized processing hub for distributions, similar to what they're doing with digital, because all of the societies right now, they're all signatory to an organization called Latin Auteur, where they've put their rights into Latin Auteur, and Latin Auteur is the one who is doing the licensing of all the major DSPs across the region. So I think using that as an analogy and pulling that down to other forms of income flows that they have, could be advantageous to them.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And I mean, the shared database gets me so wistful in general across the entire music publishing
World.
world. Wouldn't we love it?
Oh yeah.
So the music business press is continually covering new investment by, major labels, major publishers, venture capitalists, and other players into, music tech companies, catalogs, and artists and other companies from across Africa. So David, turning to you, what do you think is driving this movement right now? And how do you think the next 5 years will look when it comes to this increased global focus on the countries of Africa as, the kind of next big frontier in terms of music? And subsequently, obviously I'm going to ask you what the challenges are, but also obviously there are a lot of countries in Africa, and how do you think the kind of, the bigger markets that we're used to, as well as the smaller markets, will kind of develop over time as, they have their different levels of maturity?
So I think that the opportunity here, particularly for tech, is the scale. I mean, you've got 1.3 billion people, and that's looking to grow by another 1.3 billion people over the next 25 years. 50% of the population currently are young, and that will be 65% by 2050. So all of them have phones, smartphones. They're keen to be connected to the rest of the world. I mean, there are systemic challenges. We don't go a day here without what we call load shedding, but you might call it a brownout or just lack of available electricity. So there's electricity challenges, there's access to broadband, and then the cost of data. So I think a lot of people are looking to solve those problems too. We're talking about whether we're going to get internet via satellite or via weather balloons. It depends whether you've got the Facebook or the Elon Musk kind of view of how we're going to get the internet in Africa. But once we get the Africans connected, the potential for music, there are only three things that really kind of drive the African market. And football, definitely one. God, it's gospel music is definitely the number one genre, and then music generally. So, and often they all go together. So it depends on the day of the week, but I think that there is a huge opportunity here because of the size of the market and because of the youth.
Right. So you see the investment, the people who are coming into Africa now see the population, the current music consumer base, the way that that's growing, and the fact that there are some easy to identify, if not necessarily easy to solve, kind of infrastructure issues that if they are addressed will kind of, immediately turn on all these folks into excellent music consumers, because the culture in so many of those countries is so music focused.
Exactly. I think Apple Music was probably the first mover on the continent and kind of grabbed the high-end subscriber market. Spotify has tried to come in and do exactly the same thing, but the newer services, Boomplay for sure. I saw Mdundo, which is a Kenyan service listed on one of the Scandinavian markets, and they're looking to provide music at a price point that is affordable to the African market. So somebody who gets that right, you're going to skip the whole terrestrial kind of the trouble with collecting from the terrestrial broadcast radio and television is that it is so decentralized. And for the same issues that Dwayne was talking about in South America, that's the real issue with extracting a lot of value from current Africa. But if everybody's using legal digital services, suddenly the money flows.
Yeah, I mean, and that makes a tremendous amount of sense and kind of speaks to what Josh was saying about, streaming services for as much as, they have their downsides. It was just as easy to download an MP3 from LimeWire as it was to download it from Apple Music and pay for it. But it is easier now, I think, to stream music legally, and it's not, as expensive, and there's not as much friction, right? You're not paying every time. So, making that turnkey kind of paid music consumption available seems like such a key for these emerging markets and developing markets in terms of, cutting down on piracy and really making it all paid, making it all monetized. So Dwayne, basically the same question, like, what do you think is the biggest obstacle? What is the biggest opportunity to royalty collection across Africa? Obviously, there's a lot of countries and they all have different levels of evolution of and maturity of their music markets. But how are those being managed currently, and what do you see is going to change or is changing?
I think outside of South Africa, the most common problem that I've seen is compliance with copyright law, and getting users of music, the broadcasters, and even some of the DSPs or providers of digital services like phone companies, because in some African countries, you have music services that allow you have phone services that provide music over the phone rather than via an internet connection, because there is no internet connection. And some of these phone companies, they don't want to engage with CMOs to license, and the TV stations don't want to engage with CMOs. And you find some of the governments actually don't even want to support the local CMOs, which is quite a shame, because there's a lot of missed opportunities within a lot of these territories for collections, for not even for foreign rights holders, because as David said, in most of these territories, they're playing a lot of their own music, and a lot of the local rights holders are missing out in a major way. But I think in terms of opportunities, there's great opportunities in Africa for CMOs to be creative in trying to educate themselves a bit more about how to reach the right people within the right organizations. Because I've seen some creative thinking in licensing in some organizations where they reach out to the legal counsel of the head of the mother organization in a different country to try to influence change. And there's always also the opportunity for the local societies to just beef themselves up a bit more, their knowledge of copyright processes and all of these things are concerned, which could help them do a better job locally.
And that makes sense. The decentralization point, I think, is something that keeps coming up, and is not a problem that is unknown to the U.S. or European countries either. It's very much an issue across the publishing world. But obviously, the more money there is to be made, or the more money that has been made, the more people are going to invest in finding more of the money. So it feels like it's an evolving process in these markets that are still developing. Speaking of markets that are still developing, so Ryan, despite its massive population, music consumers and potential consumers, in a lot of ways, China is seen as like a young market for streaming and for publishing monetization. It's also a market that people are, really obsessed with knowing more about. Obviously, there's a huge population who are engaged with music. Because of this potential, as a market, it's also a big focus for catalog investors and rights holders when they're determining kind of how they're going to monetize what they control. And so I'm interested, Ryan, in what you think kind of the next few years hold when it comes to the music market in China, in terms of not only services, obviously there are a lot of services there, and monetization opportunities for artists and rights holders, maybe as well as in terms of overall consumption? Kind of a big question, had 3 parts, but you know, what's your take on kind of where things are, what the opportunities are, and where they're moving? I cannot hear you. Can everyone else hear Ryan? Are you muted?
How's that?
There we go, we got you.
Okay, I've got 2 mute buttons and one was off, one was on. Typical. Okay, well, look, that is it's a big question to unpack. And really, I guess the key single word to precursor everything else I want to say is probably about, let's just say, or the key phrase is muted expectation. It's probably a little bit relatable to where we are. So maybe setting the scene a little bit and building on what you've said. So you're right, the usual narrative. So, I mean, anyone who looks at China has an eye on the industry press. There's a lot of reason to be optimistic about the general direction of travel. And, you know, the narrative goes something along the lines of 1.3 billion people, 850 million smartphones, people spending 6 hours plus a day on those smartphones, double-digit growth for the music industry. I mean, earlier I mentioned it. I think it's in the 7th place in IFPI's top 10. It was 12, not 2 years ago. Streaming is obviously massive. I think of the overall value of the market, I think it's usually considered well over 50%. And a business that was worth, according to some reports, about 100 million in 2015 is now over 750 million in 2019. So there are all these big numbers about. Everyone's investing in the region. We're all familiar with the stories of the tech titans, and their multiple streaming services and how they work locally and internationally. But the one part that I would hark back to, and this is something that is clearly a recurring theme across these comparable markets in some sense, goes to what Josh pointed out first, about sort of the murky pirate history that was pre the streaming age, the MP3 CDs, and China, depending on your perspective now, was at least synonymous with IP infringement at some points. But you've got major players now who are doing deals with the major music companies. So there's a lot of reason to be optimistic. So looking at the CMO side of things, MCSC, the local CMO there, has clearly had a good last year. I think double-digit growth, maybe over 20%, close to 30% in overall collections, largely driven by digital. But that does belie some real big issues in the territory. So when we look at offline, huge land mass, the decentralized nature of that, even though there are significant urban areas, the challenges around public performance licensing, so bars, clubs, that sort of thing. I think just as a number, I think MCSC collects about the same as Compass. So Compass is a Singaporean-based collection society, population of 5 million. It manages to collect the same for public performance as MCSC for the entire China mainland. There's also challenges around sort of traditional broadcast. I think there are a few thousand broadcasters in the territory, huge potential. MCSC's really struggled despite their best efforts. I think there's maybe under 200 of those are licensed. They've had difficulties with the tariff, where it's about 1% of a defined income. Whereas in the UK, for instance, it's between 3 and 5% of a defined income. So there's a huge value issue there. So these are all the general kind of monetization problems that are experienced in the CMO world. But turning to digital, where a lot of the newspapers, the industry press really does focus on. So there is a lot of positivity about the growth in the industry, the consumption, the deals being made. But there is sort of one kind of more controversial point, and probably some things that don't dovetail neatly into the rosy picture that's painted by the growth in numbers. So there's something about consumption that while usage is high, the uptake of, which is a great start considering the piracy in the background there, but the actual number of paying subscribers is quite low. And then what subscribers are paying for those services, a fraction of what matches equivalent payments in Europe and places like that. And whether or not that's right is a different question, but it certainly frames expectations when people are looking into the territory about value there. And will that change over time? Potentially, who knows? But it's definitely an important question. Some of the other questions that I'd consider thinking about are about the nature of how publishing rights are licensed to those services in the region. It isn't exactly clear how it all neatly fits in with the way majors are licensing, the way multiple publishing parties, sort of the larger publishers are incorporated into those deals, and how MCSC fits into that. So, you know, from a rights owner perspective, there is what's usually construed as quite a broad grey area that still needs some clarification, and that really goes to your point about the nascent nature of publishing in the territory. What I would say, and this is the one part that I think might be important to consider in China at the moment. So from a musical work perspective, in terms of the licensing and administration, you know, you really do need to expect consider China in a different way to the rest of the way the rest of the world considers streaming in terms of copyright law. So one of the key concepts that's really kind of a hot topic at the moment is this concerns this right called the right of information network dissemination. So it's really the online right, if I've got the words out correctly. So I won't delve too much into the weeds, but it's suffice to say that the rest of the world usually construes or understands like an online stream, and I think we heard a bit about this in some of the sessions yesterday, involves a performing and mechanical right. Traditionally, a performing right would be licensed by a collection society, the mechanical by a publisher in most instances. Now, the way that's construed in China is that the information network dissemination right it has been argued is a complete, distinct, standalone right by someone. So the implications of that come down to who has the authority to license it, how it's understood in the market, and it creates confusion somewhat. And it goes against the expectations in some ways of the local CMO and how the rights do get administered there. That's not necessarily to say, you know, it's right or wrong at the moment, but that ambiguity in the market is never helpful to anybody. And then at the back end of that, one of the key challenges is just generally, you know, that's before you get into the operational challenges around the nature of the metadata being used by DSPs, how CMOs or the publishing entities then use that, match it, process, allocate, and distribute that. So there's a significant number of challenges in that, which really does neatly fit into the expectations of how that market works for songwriters in the longer term. And I would say that despite all of the amazing numbers and double-digit growth you hear about the market, it's important that when you drill down into those nuts and bolts and what it really means for songwriters, that you manage expectations with those complexities in the market. So while it's forecast to grow significantly over the next few years, I think some reports that I glanced at talk about the streaming being worth close to over 1.5 million by 1.5 billion dollars by 2024, something like that. So that's pretty much double where we are now, according to reports. So the direction's positive. There's lots of good signs, but the publishing part and the infrastructure, the rights infrastructure that underlines that, raises questions about transparency, efficiency, and how that all works in the longer term. So yeah, there's quite a lot in that. So I appreciate, I've gone on a bit there, but that's kind of how I see it. Optimism, but muted with the reality, the practical reality of administrating that region.
Absolutely. So it seems like with the market in China, we've got the decentralization on a local market basis. We've got the usual issues of data matching, registration, but we also have this kind of interesting, spicy other complexity, which is perhaps this isn't a performance right or a mechanical right, it's a different type of right. And so there's the question mark of, okay, well, who gets that? Like, which involved parties monetize on this unique type of right that we don't have precedent for in other territories. That's completely fascinating. Thank you for sharing that dive in. Dwayne, in terms of China, what is your perspective in terms of, Ryan spoke to the challenges a bit, but from your view, what do you think is kind of the opportunity there and the complexity beyond what is already a lot of complexity that we talked about?
Yeah, I thought Ryan was actually quite comprehensive, but I think in terms of the opportunity, Ryan's absolutely right. This mouthful of a right that I wouldn't even attempt to say right now is it's causing a lot of confusion, and I think the term that comes to mind, especially in the current climate of COVID, is never let a good crisis go to waste, right? And I think that a lot of the bigger music companies are using this ambiguity to their advantage, and a lot of other smaller music companies as well, knowing that the opportunity is there based on numbers like what Ryan has presented. They're looking to do the same, right? Because there is definitely value that's being left on the table there, 100%. And the question everybody's asking is how do we get at it, right? There's value there right now. How do we get at it and make sure that we, everyone has their piece. So that's pretty much based on a lot of conversations that I'm having at the moment that are quite current. That's what everyone's asking themselves, where China's concerned.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really kind of salient, overarching point about the markets we're discussing today, as well as, frankly, publishing royalties in general. While it's easy to look at DSP performances and say, okay, I know where these are coming from, I expect these in this amount of time. When you get to performance royalties and when you're talking about, global markets and these kind of more diffuse types of earnings, where, there are geographical issues, where there are, different broadcasters using different data types and different types of reporting, that really speaks to a lot of the ambiguity that I think frustrates a lot of people when it comes to music publishing and administration, because, they can look at their distributor statement and see, I shipped this many copies, I streamed this many times, it's been a month, I got my money. Whereas publishing obviously is a lot longer process and a lot more complexity, like, myriad more complexity, that's not what I keep using weird words, guys. A lot more complexity than we're used to on the master side, which does cause some consternation, I would say. I have one final question since we're getting towards the end. I want to kind of do a round table. So we'll start with you, Josh. What current or upcoming kind of, put on your future goggles, your time machine, if you will, what current or kind of developing upcoming music technology do you think will have the most impact when it comes to Latin America, both for artists from the region as well as, the artists from elsewhere having market impact?
Well, I'm embarrassed to say this since it's not really necessarily a technology development, but more of a tech infrastructure development. But honestly, I think, for example, with YouTube, Google hiring more people for ad sales,
Sure.
in a place like Brazil would have a big impact on potentially increasing royalty rates. Or if countries like Mexico were to start paying publishing royalties directly, it would be a game changer. A trusted friend in the music industry in Mexico once told me they believe Google only has like 10 ad salespeople in the entire country. That's a country of 100 million people. So yes, it's a lot less wealthy than the United States or Europe, but you can't really expect increase in royalty rates if you're not seeing more sales, right, of advertising. And most people using YouTube are not using a premium version, they're using the free basic tier in Latin America. So I do think that isn't so much necessarily a tech solution, but just a tech infrastructure development. If they were to add more ad salespeople, as we talked about before, obviously on the streaming side with platforms like, it's in Latin America, Spotify, and to a lesser extent, Deezer are the dominant ones. Apple really only seems to have a presence in Mexico. But just continuing to bring on tens of millions of people who were not previously accessing music by paid platforms, that's really key. I think converting them into paying subscribers, if at all possible. It may not be at the $10 monthly rate like we see in the US for Spotify subscription, but even if it's $2 in Uruguay would be more than what we're seeing right now. And then one thing, and again, I don't know if this might be I don't know if the solution exists, but it's a tech issue that I am continuously shocked that nobody in Billboard or any music business publication talks about, at least with YouTube, is what we call mismerges or erroneous claims. So I'm just going to briefly explain this.
I'm too familiar with them, but yes, I think definitely continue.
It's a huge problem. I would say about 30% of all songs on YouTube are currently mismerged, meaning if Anna wrote a love song called I Love You and I wrote a death metal song called I Love You, and they're totally different, there's a good chance there will be some metadata or glitch at YouTube. My royalties will accidentally get paid to Anna or vice versa, or two publishers will just go into conflict. And when songs go into conflict on YouTube, nobody gets paid. So I always joke, I tell people, like, if you're writing a song, don't call it I Love You, call it I Love You, Yolanda Ramira Garcia, because then you'll have a super specific title and it probably won't get mismerged with another song. But I never see anyone.
Good, point, like, make your song title specific.
It's sad. I would tell anyone who has at least a modest hit, check with their publisher and make sure they look in the YouTube CMS system and check if the song's in conflict. Because I can't tell you how many times our clients' songs are mismerged with Universal or Sony, and the song is totally unrelated. And years can go by. That money is just sitting at YouTube. So I would love to see a technological advance that could get these hundreds of thousands of songs out of conflict.
One, I think mismerges and conflicts are not only a YouTube issue, they're easier to find on YouTube when you have direct CMS access to their backend. But this is something that we've talked about, Josh. There are conflicts and merge issues with, across the board, whether it's, someone is claiming erroneously because they think they have the rights, or it's a mismatch of data. And I think your point about, YouTube and the other services having more on the ground, local language speaking personnel not only helps when it comes to ad sales, that's huge, but also helps when it comes to interacting with local writers, local publishers, local companies about stuff like clearing up their merges, clearing up their conflicts, getting their onboarding done, like all their registration.
YouTube refuses to act as a referee and leaves it up to the publishers. And it's heartbreaking. I have a client who has a song with over 1 billion views, and all of the royalties got paid accidentally to Universal. Good luck getting it back from them.
Yeah, that is a little ironclad. So similar question for you, David. What do you see as, and we kind of talked about this, like telecom infrastructure development, but what do you see as the biggest kind of technological development that will have a short-term and mid-term impact on the music markets across Africa?
So everything that Josh said, that kind of covers a lot of things. Definitely the price point is the biggest problem. So the reason that people go to YouTube in a underdeveloped territory or less developed territories, because it feels like free. Yeah. So if you can get better money by selling more advertising on YouTube, certainly there'd be more money. And for the legitimate streaming services, if you can offer a day rate or a party rate, a weekend, or something that is affordable, So when Dwayne was talking about what the telcos are doing, they do that. The telcos offer an affordable service. Problem is that they don't want to deal with all the record labels and the music publishers and the complexity of music rights. So they deal with these huge kind of value-added services, and they keep 60% of the money, and the other 30%, 40% gets distributed between labels and publishing. So that's after the telcos have taken their 50% off the top. So I think that's getting the price point right and definitely hitting more sales.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And Ryan, I'm going to ask you the same question in terms of the Asia Pacific market that we're focused on today. What current or kind of upcoming music development do you think is going to be the biggest kind of change agent? Obviously, you've got a big group of countries. You can parcel them out a bit if you'd like.
I'll probably speak. This is really the unsexy part of the kind of point I'm going to make. But really, the technology is there, and it's the smartphone. Mm-hmm. And for many regions, the rates of penetration vary dramatically. So earlier, when I was talking about China being the largest by volume smartphone consumer market, I think it's still only 60% penetrated. So it's a wonder to see what would happen for those other countries that all hold big populations in Indonesia, Malaysia, and the likes, and seeing where that mobile penetration, that smartphone goes, and what that means for consumption. So that's really what I would think is the technological development that would have most impact. But we'll see how that uptake plays out over the years. But the more kind of headline grabby side of things is what AI is doing. And it would be magical to think that it could somehow be harnessed by CMOs to deal with a number of the problems we face with, the merged works, duplicate claims, and all those bread and butter headaches that we experience in publishing and CMOs. But, it's interesting to see how AI is being used, what it means for composers and all that sort of stuff. But I guess in particular, how it also drives consumption. So when we look at, TikTok, for instance, its special sources often positioned as, its AI for you algorithm, and the way it knows what you want to see, it can almost read your mind and present you with, the content that you want to see. So there's an angle there, but, that's a minor part, I'd say. The real pipes to music, the smartphones, I feel would be the development of the current technology that's probably going to have the longest impact and the biggest impact.
And do you think like smartphones becoming less expensive, or is there an access issue in that way, or is it kind of just more accepting the technology more broadly?
Yeah, it's all of those things, essentially.
I guess becoming less expensive doesn't hurt if you're trying to get someone to buy something.
No, absolutely not. And then there's, once you've had that, it's still the question of the price point that David points to and that exists in the markets he's looking at. So, it's not without challenges, and it's really about respecting really what's happening without this kind of blind optimism that because of the big numbers you're seeing that somehow translates into, vast sums. It will do, but there are many pieces of the puzzle that need to stack up until we get to that point.
Absolutely. No, that makes a ton of sense. Guys, this has been really great, really fascinating. We've got participants I've seen in the chat from all over the world. So thank you all for joining us. Thanks to Dwayne, to Ryan, to David, to Josh for being here and discussing these, fascinating developing markets, which all have so much to offer in terms of music that they're exporting to us and, getting, music from other territories to those audiences. It's like Ryan says, we're keeping our expectations managed, but it is quite exciting as we see technology enabling further globalization and just kind of further, globalizing, I think, people's culture consumption, like getting people excited about, you know, non-English speaking, non-English language music. And I think this expands to other areas of culture, is very exciting. Thank you all for coming. And we are done, I believe. I didn't have a good closing sentence.
Cool.
Great information, Anna, this panel and the last 2 days. I mean, what you guys, put together for this event was phenomenal. And I think we see that in the chat that all those who have attended the last two days have, gained a wealth of knowledge. So thank you, Songtrust. Thank you all for attending. Thank you all for participating as speakers. Music Biz greatly appreciates it. Have a great rest of your day. And we hope to see you back here at a Music Biz event soon.
Thank you all
very much.
Take good care.
Bye-bye.